Matt Roloff's reign over the farm ended not with a noisy bulldozer, but with a quiet, single piece of paper from a judge. Today, we are looking at the heartbreaking details of Matt's final hours on the farm before a sheriff escorted him away forever. For over 3 decades, Roloff Farms was more than just a piece of property in Oregon. It was a television set, a family compound, a seasonal tourist destination, and most importantly, it was the physical manifestation of Matt Roloff's mind. He took a modest plot of land and molded it into a sprawling playground that reflected his endless ambition. Every bridge, every castle, and every patch of dirt had his fingerprints on it. But that massive kingdom has now collapsed in a way that very few people could have predicted. The end did not come through a family negotiation or a standard real estate sale. It came through the brutal, unyielding reality of a bankruptcy court. My read on this entire situation is that while Matt's stubbornness and financial choices certainly set the stage for this disaster, the absolute finality of being ordered off his own land in a matter of days is a profoundly tragic end to a 30-year legacy. It feels less like a simple legal procedure and more like an exile. To really understand the weight of what just happened, we have to look at the financial and legal reality that crashed down on the property. According to the case details that led to this eviction, a bankruptcy trustee took a very hard look at Matt's recent financial maneuvers. The core issue centered around his new custom-built mansion. For years, viewers watched Matt obsess over building his ultimate dream home on the farm. He poured an immense amount of money, time, and resources into creating a luxury estate tailored exactly to his physical needs and grand tastes. But the bankruptcy trustee argued that this custom mansion was a luxury asset funded by fraudulently obtained funds. The judge, presiding over the case, listened to the arguments, reviewed the financial trails, and ultimately granted the trustee's motion. When a judge agrees with a bankruptcy trustee that funds were misappropriated to build a luxury asset, the hammer falls incredibly fast. The court gave Matt exactly 72 hours to vacate the premises. Think about the sheer panic of that timeline. I want to be clear that my understanding of this legal maneuver is just my own perspective based on how bankruptcy proceedings typically function. But a 72-hour notice is extremely aggressive. It is the kind of order handed down when the court believes the asset must be secured immediately. For a man who lived on that land for 30 years, who accumulated barns full of equipment, memories, and personal belongings, 3 days is virtually nothing. It is a mandate to leave your life behind. I think Matt probably believed right up until the gavel dropped that he could negotiate his way out of it. He has spent his entire life talking his way into deals and out of tight spots. But a federal bankruptcy judge does not care about your charm or your television history. They only care about the math, and the math finally caught up with him. The reality of the situation materialized in the most humiliating way possible. The clock was ticking down on his 72-hour window when a Washington County Sheriff's deputy drove up the long, familiar driveway. This is the same driveway that used to welcome thousands of excited fans during pumpkin season. It is the same driveway where his children learned to ride bikes and drive cars. Now, it was accommodating law enforcement for an eviction. The deputy walked right up to the porch and taped a bright orange notice to vacate directly onto Matt's custom front door. I find this visual absolutely staggering. Matt had just finished building this beautiful, expensive house. He picked out the wood for that door. He designed the entryway to be his permanent stronghold, and he had to stand inside, looking through the glass, watching a local deputy slap a neon orange legal warning onto the wood. He watched the ultimate humiliation happen directly from his window. It is hard to imagine a more jarring shift in power. For decades, Matt was the undisputed mayor of Roloff Farms. He gave the orders. He told people where to park, what to build, and when to leave. In that moment with the sheriff's deputy, all of that authority evaporated. He was no longer the owner of an empire. He was just a man being told to get out of the house. I suspect that seeing that orange paper glowing against the wood was the first moment his brain truly accepted that it was over. You can fight with family members and you can argue with contractors, but you cannot argue with a piece of paper signed by a judge and delivered by a deputy with a badge. As the sun began to set on his final evening at the farm, Matt made a choice that I think speaks volumes about his state of mind. He did not spend those last few hours frantically packing boxes or making angry phone calls. Instead, he took a solitary walk using his crutches across the ruined property. The farm he was walking through was no longer the vibrant, bustling place viewers remember from the early seasons of the show. It had become a casualty of his financial collapse. Doing this walk on crutches requires immense physical effort for Matt, which tells me this was something he felt a deep psychological need to do. He needed to say goodbye to the dirt he had moved around for half his life. During this quiet walk, he stopped at the western town. This was once a massive focal point of the farm and the television show. It had a jail, a bank, and a saloon. It was a place where he played out his childhood fantasies on a grand scale. But on this final night, he reached out and touched the last remaining post of the saloon facade. The rest of it was gone or ruined. He just held on to that one piece of wood. It is difficult not to feel a sense of pity for him in that moment. I know many people are angry with him for how he handled the farm negotiations with his sons, but seeing a man touch the rotting remains of his greatest creation is incredibly sad. He built that town to create a legacy, and now it is just debris on land he no longer owns. He continued his walk and eventually stood staring at a muddy scar in the earth. This was the spot where his famous pirate ship once stood. The pirate ship was perhaps the most iconic structure he ever built for his children. It represented a time when the family was united, when the kids were young, and when the farm was a place of pure joy rather than a battleground for corporate control. The fact that the ship is gone, leaving nothing but a muddy scar in the ground, is incredibly symbolic. It mirrors the relationship he has with his kids today. The fun and the magic have been ripped out, and all that is left is the damage. Standing there on his crutches, looking at that mud, he had to confront the reality of what his ambition had cost him. He chose the farm over compromising with his family. He pushed for maximum control and maximum expansion. And in the end, he lost the family, and then he lost the farm anyway. I think we have to pause and look at the complicated feelings surrounding this legal strike. There is a massive counter-argument to the tragedy of Matt's exit. A lot of people online and in the viewing audience have pointed out that Matt brought every single piece of this disaster upon himself. The most charitable interpretation of the judge's ruling is that the legal system worked exactly as it is supposed to work. If you take funds that do not belong to you or hide money from legitimate creditors to build yourself a luxury mansion, the court will take it away. Bankruptcy laws exist to protect creditors from people who try to live beyond their means while avoiding their debts. Those people who lack sympathy for Matt argue that he played fast and loose with the farm's finances for years, constantly borrowing and building without a solid foundation. You also have to consider the perspective of those who feel this is long overdue justice for Amy Roloff. Amy spent years trying to rein in Matt's spending. She constantly voiced her concerns about the endless projects and the mounting debt. When they divorced, she eventually agreed to a buyout to remove herself from the toxic financial stress of the property. Fans of Amy might view this eviction as the universe balancing the scales. Matt bought her out, he alienated his sons who wanted to buy the property, and he tried to keep the entire kingdom for himself and his new partner. For him to lose it all to a bankruptcy trustee because he overreached on a custom mansion feels like poetic justice to his critics. I understand that perspective completely. It is very hard to feel sorry for someone who was given multiple opportunities to share his wealth and preserve his legacy, but instead chose a path of greed that led straight to a courtroom. Honestly, my own opinion sits somewhere in the middle. I do not think Matt is an evil mastermind who intentionally set out to commit financial fraud. I think he is a man crippled by his own arrogance. He likely believed he could just outwork or outborrow his problems like he always had. He lived in a state of perpetual denial, and the judge finally forced him to wake up. The next morning arrived with a cold, clinical efficiency. There were no moving trucks lined up to take his belongings. There were no family members gathered to help him pack up the memories of the last 30 years. Instead, a black, unmarked SUV arrived to escort him off the property. The choice of a vehicle rather than a standard police cruiser or a moving van suggests a high level of security and control over his departure. The trustee and the authorities were making sure the exit was immediate and total. They were not there to help him move. They were there to make sure he left. When Matt finally walked out of the custom house he had built, he was not carrying boxes of family albums or cherished tools. He left carrying a single, small briefcase. Think about the volume of a single briefcase. You spend 3 decades accumulating wealth, property, heavy machinery, and endless collections of personal items, and it all gets reduced to what you can carry in one hand. Whatever was in that briefcase, whether it was legal documents, medication, or a few small photos, it was all he was allowed to take from his empire. He climbed into the SUV and the vehicle drove away down the long driveway. According to the accounts of his departure, he never looked back. He did not turn his head to look at the house or the fields one last time. He just stared straight ahead as he was driven away from 30 years of history. It is a jarring conclusion to a story that millions of people watched unfold on television. The farm was Matt's entire identity. Without that land to manage, without tractors to drive and dirt to move, he is entirely untethered. The kingdom has fallen, the assets have been seized, and the mayor has been exiled. Did the judge go too far by taking his home in such a rapid and total manner? Or is this the ultimate justice for Amy? That is the question that remains as the dust settles on the empty property.